can't save everyone, but if my story can help prevent even one case of abuse, then everything I went through will have been worth it. Marcus has started dating someone new, a woman named Sarah, whom he met at a support group for crime victims' family members. At first, I worried about how this would affect our reconstructed relationship. But Sarah is genuinely wonderful. She's transparent, honest, and completely respects the boundaries Marcus and I have established. Mom, Marcus told me last week, I want you to know that I will never allow anyone to hurt you again. I've learned to recognize the signs of manipulation, and I promise I will always believe you when you tell me something isn't right. Marcus, I replied, I don't need you to protect me from everything. I just need you to trust me and my judgment. I'm stronger than any of us thought. And it's true. I am stronger. The process of surviving Allison's betrayal, of fighting for my sanity and my life, has taught me things about myself I never knew. I'm 62 years old, but in many ways, I feel like my real life is just beginning. I've resumed activities I had abandoned during the months Allison was poisoning me. I went back to my yoga classes, where my classmates welcomed me with open arms. I joined a book club at the local public library. I even took painting lessons, something I had always wanted to do but never found the time for. Every new activity, every new friendship, every day I wake up without fear is a victory over what Allison tried to do to me. She tried to turn me into a helpless victim, a confused old woman who could be manipulated and eventually eliminated. But she failed. One afternoon, while working in my garden, I found a letter in my mailbox. It had no return address, but I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from Allison, writing from prison. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened. I owed her nothing, and I had no obligation to read her words. But curiosity overcame my caution. The letter was brief and, typical of Allison, completely self-centered. She didn't apologize for what she had done. Instead, she complained about the prison conditions and insisted she had been misunderstood. It ended with a line that made me laugh despite everything. I hope you appreciate the favor I tried to do you. Even now, even after confessing to multiple murders, Allison saw herself as the heroine of her own story. It was a perfect reminder of why she had been so dangerous and why my decision to cut off all contact with her had been the correct one. I burned the letter in my fireplace that night, watching the words vanish into ashes. It was symbolic. The last vestige of power Allison had over me turned into smoke and disappeared forever. This morning, as I drink my coffee on the porch of my new home, watching the sun rise over Lake Lanier, I reflect on everything I have lost and everything I have gained. I lost my innocence about humanity's capacity for evil. I lost the version of myself that believed goodness would always be recognized and rewarded. But I gained something much more valuable. I gained the absolute certainty of my own strength. I gained the wisdom that comes from surviving the unthinkable. I gained a deeper, more honest relationship with my son. And I gained the satisfaction of knowing that my experience is helping to protect others. Marcus is arriving in an hour for our weekly Sunday lunch. We're going to cook together, something we used to do when he was a kid, but had stopped doing once Allison entered our lives. It's a tradition we've recovered along with so many other things I thought I had lost forever. As I wait for him, I think of all the people who weren't as lucky as I was. Eleanor Washington and Allison's other victims never had the chance to rebuild their lives. But their memory lives on in the work Jada and I are doing to prevent future abuse. At 62, I've learned that life can change in an instant. It can turn into a nightmare without warning, but it can also transform into something beautiful when you least expect it. The key is to never give up, to keep fighting, even when it seems all hope is lost. I am Celeste Montgomery. I survived an attempted murder by my own family. And I am here to tell my story, not as a victim, but as a warrior who refused to be silenced. And every day I wake up free, healthy, and in control of my own life is my sweetest revenge against those who thought they could destroy me. I think she had been carrying the weight of those secrets for a long time. What will happen to her now? With the confessions and the evidence we have, she will likely face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When I hung up the phone, I felt no triumph or vengeance. I felt only a profound sadness for all the lives Allison had destroyed, and an overwhelming relief that her reign of terror was finally over. But I also knew that the most difficult part of my healing process was just beginning. 6 months after that horrible night at Giovanni's Trattoria, I wake up every morning with a feeling I had forgotten existed. Peace. It's a strange sensation after so many months of living in constant fear, doubting my own mind, feeling like I was losing pieces of myself every day. My morning routine has changed completely. I no longer need to obsessively check if I locked the door or turned off the stove because now I trust my memory. I no longer have to question every decision I make, wondering if it's evidence of mental decline. I know my mind is clear, that it always was clear, and that the confusion and forgetfulness were caused by poison, not illness. Marcus comes to visit me every Sunday, and our relationship has transformed in ways I never imagined possible. The guilt he carried for doubting me, for letting Allison manipulate him, had been consuming him for weeks after the trial. But we worked through it together in family therapy, and little by little, we've built a new, deeper trust. Mom, he told me during one of our sessions, I think part of me always knew something wasn't right. But it was easier to believe your mind was deteriorating than to face the possibility that my wife was a killer. Why was it easier? The therapist asked him. Because if Mom was sick, I could be the hero who took care of her. But if Allison was lying, that meant I had chosen poorly, that I had brought danger into my mother's life. That would make me the villain of the story. It was painful to hear that, but it was also a relief. Marcus had found the courage to be honest about his own fears and insecurities, and that allowed us to truly heal. Allison's trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 full days, recounting my story to a jury who listened with a mixture of horror and compassion. Jada Reynolds also testified, speaking bravely about her grandmother's death and her determination to find justice. Allison attempted to use an insanity defense, claiming she suffered from a personality disorder that made her incapable of controlling her actions. But the prosecution presented evidence of years of meticulous planning, internet searches on poisons and murder methods, falsified documents, and deliberate financial manipulation. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected, only emptiness. A woman I had once called family would be sent to prison for the rest of her life. And while I knew it was justice, I couldn't help but feel sadness for what might have been if Allison had chosen a different path. After the trial, I decided to make some important changes in my life. The first was to move. I couldn't continue living in the house where Allison had come so many times to slowly poison me. Every corner held memories of those terrible months, and I needed a new space to build a new life. I found a charming small house near Lake Lanier with a yard that lets me spend hours working with my hands on the dirt. There's something deeply healing about planting seeds and watching them grow, about creating life after having been so close to losing it. Jada Reynolds has become an important part of my new life. We meet regularly for coffee, and we've developed a friendship that goes beyond the circumstances that brought us together. She is finishing her nursing degree, and I've been helping her financially with her studies. It's my way of honoring the memory of her grandmother, Eleanor, and thanking her for saving my life. Mrs. Montgomery, she told me during one of our recent visits, there's something I want to tell you. Tell me, dear. I've been thinking about specializing in geriatric care. I want to work with older adults, help them maintain their dignity and independence for as long as possible. That's wonderful, Jada. What inspired you to make that decision? You, she replied simply. Watching you fight to get your life back, how you refused to be defined by what Allison did to you, showed me that older people aren't helpless victims. They are warriors who have survived decades of life and deserve respect and protection. Her words filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Knowing that my horrible experience could inspire something good in the world gave a purpose to all the pain I had suffered. I've started speaking publicly about my experience, not to seek attention or sympathy, but to educate other families about the signs of elder abuse. It's astonishing how many people approach me after my talks to say they recognize some of the patterns I describe in their own families. A 70-year-old woman told me her son-in-law had been pressuring her to grant him access to her bank accounts using the same type of manipulation Allison had used on me. Another family realized their father's episodes of confusion always occurred after visits from his new caregiver. She knew exactly my vulnerable spots and used them against me. The next day, as we entered the hospital, I felt like I was walking toward my own execution. Detective Lee escorted us through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and pain until we reached the room where Allison was being guarded. There was a police officer at the door, which made me feel a little safer. But when the detective opened the door and I saw Allison for the first time since that horrible night at the restaurant, all my mental preparation vanished. She was pale and thin with IV tubes connected to her arm, but her eyes had the same calculating intensity they had always held. When she saw me enter, her expression immediately shifted to one of feigned vulnerability. Celeste, she said in a weak voice, reaching out a hand toward me. Thank God you're okay. I was so worried. I stood near the door, refusing to approach her bed. Marcus positioned himself protectively between us. Allison, I said, my voice firm, we know what you did. Her expression of confusion seemed genuine, but I had already learned what a good actress she was. What are you talking about? I'm the one who got sick. Someone tried to poison both of us. No, I replied. Someone tried to poison me, and that person was you. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something darker in her eyes, but she quickly hid it behind seemingly sincere tears. Celeste, I don't understand why you're accusing me of something so terrible. I love you like a mother. I would never hurt you. How did you love Jada Reynolds' grandmother, Eleanor Washington? I asked. The change in her expression was instantaneous. The tears dried, the vulnerability disappeared, and for a moment I saw the real Allison. Cold, calculating, furious. I don't know who you're talking about, she said, but her voice had lost all its feigned warmth. Marcus took a step forward. Allison, we found the medications at her house. We found your correspondence. We know about the money, about the documents you made Mom sign. We know everything. Allison sat up straighter in bed, and her mask of the innocent victim began to completely slip. Marcus, honey, you have to understand, everything I did was for us, for our future. Our future? He repeated in disbelief. Your mother is older, Marcus. She doesn't have many good years left. Wouldn't it be better if she could enjoy her final years in a place where she received appropriate care, while we built a life together without the burden of constantly worrying about her? The coldness with which she spoke about me, as if I were an inconvenient object, made me nauseous. And the money? Marcus asked. Was this all about the money? Allison sighed, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. Money is important. Marcus, your mother isn't going to live forever. And when she's gone, why shouldn't we make sure we are comfortable? She doesn't need all those savings in a nursing home. Are you talking about killing me? I said, my voice trembling, but steady. For the first time, Allison looked directly at me with pure hatred. I'm talking about being practical about an inevitable situation. How were you practical with Jada's grandmother, Eleanor Washington? Her smile turned cruel. Eleanor Washington was a lonely old woman who was going to die anyway. At least I made sure her final months were comfortable and that her money ended up in her family's hands. She didn't have anyone else. Her family visited once a month if she was lucky. I was the only one who truly cared about her in the end. Marcus was shaking with rage. How many other people have you hurt, Allison? I haven't hurt anyone, she replied coldly. I've provided a peaceful transition for people who were already suffering. A peaceful transition, I repeated. You call gradually poisoning older people until they die a peaceful transition? I kept them comfortable, she insisted. No pain, no fear. It's more than most people can expect at the end of their lives. Detective Lee, who had been quietly taking notes, finally spoke. Mrs. Whitlock, are you admitting that you intentionally caused the death of Eleanor Washington and that you plan to do the same to Celeste Montgomery? Allison realized too late what she had revealed. She tried to backtrack. "Uh, no, I wasn't talking hypothetically. I'm confused from the medication." But the damage was done. She had shown her true self, and everyone in that room had witnessed it. "Allison," I said, finally stepping closer to her bed, but keeping out of her reach, "I want you to know something. For months, you made me doubt my own mind. You made me feel like a burden, like I was losing my value as a person. But I survived, and I'm going to make sure you never have the chance to do this to anyone else." Her eyes filled with fury. "Stupid old woman! You should be grateful. I was going to give you a dignified death. Now you'll rot slowly in some cheap facility where no one cares about you." Marcus moved toward her, but I put my hand on his arm to stop him. "She's not worth it," I told him. "She can't hurt us anymore." When we left the room, I felt as if I had confronted the demon that had been living in my life for months. It was terrifying, but also liberating. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked me as we walked down the corridor. "Like I just woke up from a very long nightmare, and like I can finally start to heal." That night, Detective Lee called to inform me that Allison had decided to confess in exchange for a plea agreement. She had admitted not only to the attempted murder against me, but also to the deaths of Eleanor Washington and two other elderly women over the last 3 years. "Three more?" I asked in horror. Yes. Once she started talking, she seemed almost relieved to admit what she had been doing. "She said you'd asked us to come over to help you organize some papers. And when we arrived, you seemed a little disoriented. Allison had prepared some documents, she said, had been recommended by your lawyer. You said you wanted to sign them to get everything in order. What documents were they?" "A limited power of attorney and an addition to your will." I felt as if I'd been punched in the gut. An addition. "Allison said you wanted to add a clause that would give me immediate control over your assets if you were declared mentally incompetent." "Marcus," I said, my voice trembling, "I never requested those documents. I never spoke to my lawyer about that. Allison drugged me that day to make me look confused and then manipulated me into signing documents I never would have signed in my normal state." Marcus pulled the car over into the parking lot of a local mall and covered his face with his hands. "My God, Mom. I was a complete idiot. I should have questioned everything. I should have insisted on speaking to your lawyer directly. Don't blame yourself. She had been preparing for this moment for months. She had conditioned you to believe I was sick, that my judgment was compromised. When the time came to act, you were already prepared to accept her version of events." "What are we going to do about those documents?" "We're going straight to my lawyer tomorrow and we're going to void everything. I will explain the circumstances under which they were signed, and I will make sure Allison never gets access to a single dime of my money." That night, while Marcus called his lawyer to schedule an emergency appointment, I sat in my study and reviewed all my financial documents. The magnitude of what Allison had been planning was terrifying. With those documents I had signed under the influence of her drugs, she would have had virtual control over my entire estate. Once she had me admitted to a residence as a patient with dementia, she would have been able to manipulate my money freely while keeping me sedated and isolated. And eventually, when it was no longer useful to keep me alive, she would have found a way to accelerate my death, just as she had done with Jada's grandmother. It was a perfect plan executed by a woman who had turned murder into an art form. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated the determination of a young woman who refused to forget her grandmother. And that had been her undoing. Allison woke up from the coma 4 days after drinking the poison intended for me. When Detective Lee called to inform me, I felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. On one hand, I was glad she hadn't died. As monstrous as she was, I didn't want her death on my conscience. On the other hand, I knew her waking up meant I would have to face her face to face. "How is she?" I asked over the phone. "Physically, she's recovering well," Detective Lee replied. "But mentally, well, she's very agitated. She's been asking for her husband constantly, and when we told her you were okay, her reaction was intense." "What kind of reaction?" "Complete denial. She insists there was some kind of mistake, that she would never hurt anyone. But the most concerning thing is that she's also been asking specifically for you, Mrs. Montgomery. She wants to see you." My stomach flipped. "Do I have to see her?" "You're not obligated, but it could be helpful for the case. Sometimes when suspects are confronted directly by their victims, they reveal important information. But I completely understand if you don't feel comfortable." I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to hide, to pretend Allison didn't exist and let justice run its course without my direct participation. But another part of me, a stronger part, wanted to look her in the eye and tell her she had failed to destroy me. "I'll do it," I finally said. "But I want Marcus to be present." "Of course. Tomorrow afternoon. Does that work for you?" That evening, Marcus and I sat in my kitchen, drinking tea and mentally preparing for what was to come. He had been incredibly protective of me since we discovered the truth, almost as if he feared Allison could hurt me even from her hospital bed. "Mom," he said, "you don't have to do this. We can let the police and lawyers handle everything." "Yes, I do have to do this," I replied with more firmness than I felt. "I need to see her. I need to understand how I could have been so blind for so long." "You weren't blind. She's an expert manipulator." "Maybe. But I also think part of me didn't want to see the signs because I wanted to believe that I finally had a daughter-in-law who cared about me." Marcus took my hand. "Mom, you've always had people who care about you." "You have me." "I know, honey, but it's different. You're my son. You're supposed to love me. Allison chose to be in my life, or so I thought. The idea that someone would choose me, that they would consider me worthy of affection without familial obligation, that meant a lot to me. And she took advantage of that. Yes, she took advantage of my loneliness, my desire to be loved, my fear of aging. At first, we didn't want to accept it, but Allison was very convincing. She showed us articles about dementia, talked about red flags, and gradually we started noticing things about Grandma that we hadn't seen before. Like, she looked more tired. Sometimes she seemed confused when we talked on the phone. There were days she didn't remember conversations we'd had. Allison convinced us that we needed to accept the reality that Grandma was deteriorating. Jada paused, fighting back tears. The most horrible part is that Grandma started doubting herself too. She would tell me, "Jada, I think something is wrong with me. Allison tells me I forget things and maybe she's right." "My God," I murmured. "That's exactly what was happening to me." "Yes, and then Allison started suggesting that maybe it was time to consider a specialized residence. She said she had found a wonderful, very expensive, but excellent place, the Serenity Pines Assisted Living, where Grandma would get the care she needed." "And the family agreed?" "Not immediately, but Allison was persistent. She told us we were selfish to keep Grandma at home when she clearly needed professional care, that we were putting our feelings above her well-being." I knew that tactic, guilt disguised as legitimate concern. "How long was your grandmother at that residence?" 6 months, Jada replied, her voice breaking. 6 months before she died of what they said was natural heart failure. But when I went to visit her there, something wasn't right. Grandma whispered to me that Allison visited often, always bringing her special vitamins that the doctor had prescribed. Did you investigate those vitamins? I tried, but by then it was too late. Grandma had died, and when I inquired about the medications, I was told all her medical information was confidential. Jada wiped her eyes with the napkin. but I knew something was wrong. My grandmother had a perfectly healthy heart her entire life. She had no history of cardiac problems. What did you do then? I started investigating on my own. I discovered that Allison had worked at that residence before getting the CNA job. I also found that there were other similar cases. Elderly people who had been admitted there after sudden cognitive decline and who had died of heart problems in a relatively short period. Did you tell anyone? I tried, but I had no real proof, only suspicions. The police told me that elderly people with dementia die from complications all the time. The administrators at the residence said they did everything possible for their patients. No one wanted to listen to a college student who was unhealthily processing her grief. But you didn't give up. I couldn't give up. When I saw Allison at that restaurant, it was like seeing a ghost. I had been following her discreetly for weeks, trying to gather evidence. When I saw her with you and saw the way she looked at your glass of wine, I knew she was about to do the same thing again. How did you know it was the wine? I saw her put something in your glass when you and your son were distracted talking. It was very subtle, but I was specifically watching her. In that moment, I had to make a decision. Stay quiet and risk another person dying, or act without solid proof. Thank God you decided to act. Jada nodded. But what terrifies me the most is thinking about how many other people, like my grandmother and like you, Allison has hurt. How many families have suffered because one woman decided she could gain money and power by manipulating vulnerable elders? That afternoon, Marcus came to pick me up after my meeting with Jada. During the drive home, I told him everything I had learned about Allison's pattern of behavior. Marcus, I said, I need to ask you something else, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course, Mom. Ask me anything you want. Did Allison ever mention anything about my will or financial planning? Marcus visibly tensed. Yes, he admitted after a pause. About 3 months ago, she started bringing up the topic frequently. She said it was important to make sure your affairs were in order, especially with your supposed mental decline. What kind of suggestions did she make? She wanted me to convince you to give me power of attorney. She said it would be easier to manage your finances if something happened to you. She also suggested you should consider putting the title of your house in my name to avoid legal complications later. My blood froze. And what did you think of those suggestions? At first I resisted. It seemed premature, but Allison was very insistent. She said it was the responsible thing to do, that waiting until it was too late would be a terrible mistake. Marcus? Yes. Did I sign any documents in the last few weeks without clearly remembering it? His silence was answer enough. Marcus, I need you to tell me the truth. 2 weeks ago, he finally murmured. Allison said you'd had a particularly bad episode, that you'd been very confused and had expressed concern about your finances. After the detective left, Marcus and I sat in silence for a long time. The weight of everything we had discovered was overwhelming. Marcus, I finally said, there's something you need to understand. All these months when I felt confused and sick, the worst part wasn't the physical discomfort. The worst part was thinking I was letting you down, that I was becoming a burden to you. His eyes filled with tears. You were never a burden, Mom. Never. I know that now. But in those moments when Allison told me she was worried about my mental decline, I felt like I was losing not just my mind, but also your respect and your love. She knew exactly what buttons to push, Marcus murmured. She knew my greatest fear was losing you, the same way I lost Dad. My ex-husband had died of Alzheimer's when Marcus was 25. It had been a devastating experience for the whole family, watching that strong, brilliant man gradually fade into a shadow of himself. Allison used that experience against us, I continued. She knew you would be afraid of me following your father's path, and she exploited that fear to manipulate you. Marcus nodded slowly, and I fell completely into her trap. I was so scared of watching you deteriorate that I didn't question anything she told me. Marcus? Yes. When was the first time Allison mentioned my supposed confusion? He thought for a moment. It was shortly after Grandma Margaret passed away and left me that inheritance. My mother had passed away 8 months ago, leaving me a considerable sum of money that I had planned to leave to Marcus. But now I realize that had been the catalyst for Allison's plan. She knew about the money, I said, more to myself than to him. She knew everything. She knew everything, Marcus confirmed bitterly. About your will, about Grandma's inheritance, about your fears regarding your health, and she used every piece of information to construct her perfect plan. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to losing everything. Not just my life, but my dignity, my independence, and my relationship with my son. Allison had planned to steal everything I cared about, and she had been on the verge of succeeding. But she had underestimated one thing: the power of a compassionate stranger who refused to stay silent when she saw danger. And in the end, that had been her undoing. Jada Reynolds had the most determined eyes I had ever seen. When we met at the coffee shop near the Atlanta Police Department precinct, I could see in her a strength that reminded me of myself at her age. She was petite, barely 23 years old, but there was something about her presence that radiated a wisdom that only comes from pain. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said, sitting across from me, "I've been waiting for this moment for 2 years." "Jada," I replied, taking her hands in mine, "I have no words to thank you for what you did. You saved my life." Her eyes welled up, but her voice remained steady. "I wish I could have saved my grandmother, too." Over the next hour, Jada told me the full story of what had happened to her grandmother, Eleanor Washington. It was a chilling account because it was too similar to what had been happening to me. Grandma Eleanor was the strongest woman I knew, Jada began. At 78, she was still working in her garden, cooking for the whole family on Sundays, handling her own finances. She was completely independent. "How did she meet Allison?" I asked. "My grandmother fell at the supermarket and hurt her wrist. Allison was there. She introduced herself as a CNA and offered to help her. She seemed so kind, so concerned about an older woman she didn't even know." Jada took a sip of her coffee before continuing. "Allison started visiting my grandmother regularly, bringing her food, helping her with groceries. She claimed she felt lonely because she didn't have family nearby and that caring for Grandma Eleanor made her feel useful. And your family thought it was wonderful," I said, guessing the rest. "Exactly. We were also grateful that someone was looking out for her. I was in college. My parents were working double shifts. Allison seemed like a gift from heaven. When did the problems start?" Jada sighed deeply. "After 2 months, Allison started mentioning small incidents that she had found Grandma confused. That she had forgotten to turn off the stove, that she had repeated the same story several times. Minor, but worrying things." My stomach turned as I recognized the pattern. "And you all believed her." Over the past few days, I'd been remembering incidents that at the time seemed insignificant, but now took on a sinister meaning. "Detective Lee," I said, "I think I need to tell you about some other things that have been happening." Over the next hour, I recounted everything. How Allison had started visiting me more frequently several months ago, always bringing tea or some special snack. How after those visits, I would feel strangely tired and confused. How she had subtly started questioning my memory in front of Marcus. She would say things like, "Celeste, don't you remember you already told me that story yesterday?" Or, "Honey, you just asked me that 5 minutes ago." I started doubting myself. I thought maybe I really was losing my memory. Marcus turned from the window, his face full of horror. "And I believed her," he whispered. "Every time she came home and told me you'd had an episode, I believed her. I thought she was being a good wife by looking out for you." Detective Lee took meticulous notes. "Do you recall any specific episode, Mrs. Montgomery?" "Yes," I replied, feeling rage beginning to replace the fear. 2 months ago, Allison came over for lunch. She brought a homemade soup, said she'd made too much, and didn't want it to go to waste. After eating it, I felt so unwell that I had to lie down. When Marcus arrived that night, she told him she'd found me confused, that I didn't remember having lunch with her. "And what did you remember?" "I remembered the lunch perfectly, but I felt so sick and disoriented that I couldn't defend myself." Marcus took me to the doctor the next day, but by then I was feeling better. The doctor said it was probably just a stomach virus. Marcus slumped into his chair, covering his face with his hands. She was gradually poisoning you, he murmured. I I helped her convince you that you were going crazy. It's not your fault, I said, though inside I felt a complex mix of pain and understanding. She is very good at manipulation. She manipulated me too. Detective Lee closed her notebook. Mrs. Montgomery, there's one more thing you need to know. The waitress who gave you the note, Jada Reynolds, is a nursing student. Her grandmother died 2 years ago under circumstances similar to what you're describing. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Jada's grandmother, Eleanor Washington, began showing signs of confusion and cognitive decline. Her family thought it was natural dementia. She was admitted to an assisted living facility where she died 6 months later from heart failure. But Jada always suspected something wasn't right. And what does that have to do with me? The person who cared for Jada's grandmother, who convinced the family she needed institutional care, was Allison Whitlock. At the time, she used her maiden name, Allison Peters. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus slowly raised his head, his eyes full of horrifying realization. Are you saying my wife, she'd done this before? That's exactly what we're investigating, the detective confirmed. Jada recognized Allison at the restaurant. She had been following her discreetly for weeks, trying to figure out if her suspicions were correct. When she saw what looked like a family situation, she decided to act. I thought of that young waitress who had saved my life, a stranger who had shown more concern for my well-being than my own daughter-in-law. Where's Jada now? I asked. I'd like to thank her. She is fully cooperating with our investigation, and I believe she'd like to speak with you, too. Marcus finally spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. I'm sorry I let her do this to you. I reached out and took his hands in mine. They were cold and trembling. Marcus, listen to me. Allison is an expert manipulator. This is not your fault. But I should have seen the signs, he insisted. I should have known something was wrong. How could you have known? She presented herself as the perfect daughter-in-law, worried about her elderly mother. Anyone would have thought she was being kind. Detective Lee stood up. Mrs. Montgomery, we'll need you to come to the Atlanta Police Precinct tomorrow to give a formal statement. We also want you to speak with Jada Reynolds if you are willing. Of course, I replied. I'll do whatever is necessary. Also, the doctor wants to inform you about something we found in the additional analyses. We followed the nurse to a private room where 2 detectives and the doctor we'd met earlier were waiting. The doctor's expression was even more serious than before. We've done more detailed analyses, he began, and we found something disturbing. Mrs. Whitlock didn't just have dioxin in her system. She also had traces of other cardiac medications. It appears she had been ingesting small amounts over a prolonged period. My world spun. Are you saying someone has been gradually poisoning me? That is the most likely explanation for what we are seeing, the doctor confirmed. One of the detectives, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, Detective Lieutenant Lee, leaned forward. Mrs. Montgomery, have you been taking any medication recently? Have you noticed any unusual symptoms? I thought back over the past few months. The occasional dizziness I dismissed as age, the fatigue I'd thought was normal, the moments of confusion that had worried me, but which I decided to ignore. Yes, I whispered. I've been feeling things, but I thought it was just part of getting older. Marcus squeezed my hand. Mom, why didn't you say anything to me? Because I didn't want to worry you, I replied, and because Allison assured me it was normal for my age. The words hung in the air like an accusation. And that was when I realized that my own daughter-in-law had been trying to kill me slowly and systematically, all while convincing my son that I was losing my mind. The monster hadn't come from outside. She had been living inside my own family. The next few days passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Allison was in the intensive care unit, stable but still unconscious. Marcus hadn't left my side, as if he feared something might happen to me if he left me alone. The guilt was consuming him, and I could see it in every line on his face. Detective Lee had visited me 3 times in the last 4 days. She was a meticulous woman with eyes that seemed to see through lies, and each conversation revealed more pieces of the horrific puzzle my life had become over the last few months. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said during our latest meeting, "we've been looking into your daughter-in-law's background. What we found is troubling. We were sitting in my living room, the same room where Allison had so often come to care for me during my supposed episodes of confusion. Now every corner of that room felt tainted by her lies. Allison worked as a certified nursing assistant, CNA, for 5 years before marrying your son," Detective Lee continued. "She had access to medications and was perfectly familiar with the effects of different substances." Marcus, sitting beside me, looked more haggard each day. "But why would she want to hurt Mom? I never sensed she had a problem with her." The detective exchanged a meaningful glance with me before answering. "Mr. Montgomery, we reviewed your mother's financial records. Are you aware that you are the sole beneficiary of her will?" "Of course," Marcus replied. "She's my mother. But that doesn't mean anything. I never wished for anything to happen to her for money." "No, but your wife did know about the inheritance," the detective said softly. "And according to our investigation, she had been pressuring you to have your mother make changes to her legal documents." I recalled all those seemingly innocent conversations where Allison suggested it would be prudent to get my affairs in order, how she had insisted on accompanying me to doctor's appointments, always with that worried smile and that voice full of false compassion. "There's something else," Detective Lee continued. "We found correspondence on Allison's computer. She had been researching assisted living facilities specializing in dementia patients, very expensive places where residents rarely receive family visits." My stomach churned. "She was planning to have me institutionalized?" "That appears to be the case," she confirmed. "But not only that, we also found searches on how to accelerate cognitive decline in the elderly and methods to make a death appear natural in patients with cardiac conditions." Marcus stood up abruptly, walking to the window. His shoulders trembled. "My God, what kind of monster is she?" But I needed to know more. "The results from the blood work show the presence of dioxin in extremely high levels." Marcus frowned. "Dioxin? What is that?" "It's a heart medication," the doctor explained. "In normal doses, it helps regulate heart rhythm, but the amount we found in her system is, well, it's potentially lethal." I felt as if I'd been punched in the stomach. "Are you saying someone poisoned her?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I can't make that determination," the doctor replied carefully. "But I can tell you that this amount of dioxin did not enter her system accidentally. We're going to have to contact the police to investigate." Marcus abruptly stood up, pacing back and forth in the small space. "This is impossible," he muttered. "No one would want to hurt Allison. She's a good person. Who would do something like that?" I knew the answer, but I couldn't say it yet. I needed more information. "Doctor," I said, "is it possible for someone to put this medication in a drink?" "Definitely," he replied. "Dioxin can dissolve in liquids, and in this case, we also detected alcohol in her system, which can intensify the toxic effects." That was the confirmation I needed. I pulled the note from my pocket with trembling hands and showed it to Marcus. His eyes widened as he read the words. "Mom, where did you get this?" he asked, his voice breaking. I told him everything. The waitress, the message, my decision to swap the glasses. With every word, I saw the color drain from Marcus's face. When I finished, he sank into the chair as if he'd lost all his strength. "It can't be," he whispered. Are you saying someone tried to poison you?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied firmly, though I was shaking inside. The doctor listened with a grave expression. "I will report this to the police immediately," he said. And we're going to need to run blood tests on both of you as well to make sure you haven't ingested anything dangerous. When the doctor left, Marcus and I sat in silence. I could see his mind working, processing the information, reaching conclusions he didn't want to accept. "Marcus," I said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." He looked at me, his eyes full of pain. "Have you noticed anything strange about Allison's behavior lately? Anything different at home?" Marcus took a long time to respond. When he did, his voice was barely a whisper. "A few months ago, she started getting really worried about your health." He stopped, as if he didn't want to continue. "What kind of worries?" I pressed. "She kept saying she saw you confused sometimes, that you forgot things, that maybe we should start considering care options for you." The words sounded as if they physically pained him to say. My blood ran cold. Care options? A nursing home? "She said she had researched some very nice places, that it would be better for you to have professional care." Marcus mumbled, unable to look me in the eye. "Marcus," I said, my voice trembling, "I don't have memory problems. I'm not confused. I'm perfectly fine." "I know," he whispered. "My God, I know." But she was so convincing. She showed me articles about early dementia, talked to me about red flags, and I wanted to believe she was just looking out for you. "What else?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Marcus covered his face with his hands. "Last month, she suggested I should get power of attorney over your finances. She said it was just a precaution in case something happened to you." His voice cracked. I was about to agree. I thought it was the responsible thing to do. I felt sick. The whole picture was starting to form, and it was more horrifying than I had imagined. Allison hadn't just planned to poison me. She had been preparing the groundwork to make my death seem inevitable, even expected. "Is there anything else?" Marcus continued, his voice barely audible. "3 weeks ago, I found bottles of pills in her purse. When I asked her, she said they were vitamins for herself. But now that I think about it, I never saw her take them." "Do you remember what kind of pills they were?" "I don't know. They were small, white pills, but there were a lot of them in different bottles." At that moment, a nurse approached us. "Mrs. Montgomery." "I'm Celeste Montgomery," I replied. "The police are here and they'd like to speak with you." There was no signature or further explanation, just that direct, terrifying warning. When I returned to the table, I tried to act normal, but inside, I was terrified. I looked at Marcus and Allison with new eyes. Marcus seemed completely normal, talking animatedly about his plans to renovate their kitchen. But Allison, something was different about her. Her eyes darted nervously between my glass and my face, as if she were waiting for something. That was when I made a decision that changed everything. When Marcus turned to flag down our server for more bread, I seized the moment of distraction. With one quick, casual movement, I switched my glass with Allison's. The liquid was identical, the same Cabernet we'd been drinking all night. "Finally," I said, raising the glass that was now mine, "a toast to this beautiful family moment." Marcus smiled broadly and raised his glass. Allison, unaware of the switch, raised hers too, but one that had originally been mine. We drank at the same time. The wine tasted the same as always, but I could barely focus on it. I was watching Allison intently, searching for any sign that something was wrong. At first, nothing happened. We continued to eat and chat. Marcus told me about a promotion he'd hoped to receive at his firm, and I talked about my plan to visit my sister in Portland, Oregon that fall. Allison participated in the conversation, but she seemed increasingly uneasy. It was exactly 5 minutes after the toast when it started. Allison pressed a hand to her stomach, a look of confusion on her face. "I feel a little funny," she muttered. Marcus immediately looked concerned, asking if she was okay. She shook her head, saying she'd probably eaten something that disagreed with her at lunch. But then her face began to pale visibly. Her hands started trembling, not from nerves like before, but uncontrollably. "I really don't feel well," she whispered, and I saw beads of sweat forming on her forehead, even though the restaurant was comfortably cool. Marcus immediately stood up, supporting his wife by the shoulders. "Honey, what is it?" he asked, his voice alarmed. I remained seated, watching the scene with a mix of horror and terrible fascination. Allison tried to stand, but her legs buckled. She collapsed back into her chair, breathing erratically. Her eyes were glassy, and her skin had taken on a grayish tint that terrified me. "Call 911, I yelled at Marcus, though my voice sounded eerily calm considering the situation. Panic seized the restaurant as other diners realized something serious was happening. While we waited for the paramedics, my mind couldn't stop repeating the words on the note. Your life is in danger. And now I knew, with a blood-chilling certainty, that the person who had been in danger was me. The ambulance ride to St. Jude Medical Center was a nightmare. Allison had lost consciousness, and the paramedics were working frantically to stabilize her. Marcus held my hand in the back seat, his eyes filled with terror and confusion. I clutched the waitress's note in my fist, feeling like it was the only evidence that I wasn't going crazy. In the emergency room, the doctors immediately whisked Allison away. Marcus and I were left sitting in those uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed designed to make you feel even more miserable than you already are. The smell of disinfectant made me nauseous, and the fluorescent lights created a cold, unforgiving atmosphere. "I don't understand what happened," Marcus muttered for the fifth time, running his hands through his hair. "She was fine an hour ago. Maybe it was something she ate or stomach flu." I didn't answer. I couldn't tell him about the note yet. Not until I was sure of what had really happened. But deep down, I knew this wasn't simple food poisoning. The waitress's words resonated in my head like a non-stop alarm. After what felt like hours, a young doctor with a beard approached us. His expression was serious, and I could see in his eyes that he had news he didn't know how to deliver. "Are you the family of Allison Whitlock?" he asked. "I'm her husband," Marcus immediately replied. "This is my mother. How is Allison?" The doctor sat down across from us, which instantly told me the news wasn't good. "Your wife is stable for now, but we need to talk about what caused her collapse." He paused as if carefully choosing his words. I was celebrating my birthday with my family at a restaurant when a waitress discreetly slipped a folded note onto my table. "Don't drink that." I froze. I decided to swap my wine glass with my daughter-in-law's. And what happened just 5 minutes later changed everything. My name is Celeste Montgomery, and I'm 62 years old. I never thought my 62nd birthday would be the day that saved my life, but also the day I would discover the depths of family betrayal. It was a Friday night, and my son Marcus had taken me to Giovanni's Trattoria, the Italian place I love so much in our neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia. He'd chosen it because he knew it was my favorite, or so I thought. Allison Whitlock, my daughter-in-law, sat across from me, smiling that smile I'd always found a little stiff, which I used to attribute to nerves or shyness. The restaurant was buzzing with families celebrating. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, with soft lights casting a golden glow on the wooden tables and the aroma of garlic and basil filling the air. Marcus had ordered a bottle of California Cabernet Sauvignon for a toast, and I felt genuinely happy to be surrounded by my small family. "Mom, you look radiant tonight," Marcus said, pouring wine into our glasses. His eyes sparkled with affection, and for a moment I felt like the luckiest mother in the world. Allison nodded, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, but I was too caught up in the moment's joy to notice. We'd ordered our favorite dishes. I chose the chicken parmesan, my go-to whenever I came here. Marcus decided on the spaghetti bolognese, and Allison ordered a Caesar salad, claiming she was watching her figure. Throughout dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Marcus talked about his work at the State Farm office downtown, and I shared stories about my gardening days and the senior yoga class I'd recently started attending at the local YMCA. But there was a feeling I couldn't shake, a subtle tension that seemed to radiate from Allison. Whenever Marcus turned to talk to me, she'd watch him with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Her fingers drummed nervously on the cable, and I caught her checking her cell phone several times in a way that wasn't exactly discreet. When it was time for the toast, Marcus stood up, glass held high. To Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion, for being the strongest woman I know, for raising us with so much love after Dad passed, and for teaching me what true resilience means. His words warmed my heart, and I felt happy tears welling up. Allison also raised her glass, but I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. To Celeste, she said, her voice sounding a little strained, for being such a special mother-in-law. The slight hesitation before the word special caught my attention, but I decided to ignore it. Just as I was about to raise the glass to my lips, I felt someone approach our table. It was one of the waitresses, a young woman with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. She leaned in subtly as if to wipe something from the table and slid a small folded piece of paper next to my plate. The move was so seamless that neither Marcus nor Allison noticed. The waitress, Jada Reynolds, gave me an intense, almost urgent look before quickly walking away to another section. My heart started pounding. With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper beneath the table, keeping it hidden. The words were written in clear, urgent script. Don't drink that. Your life is in danger. Trust me. The world seemed to stop. The noise of the restaurant faded into a distant murmur, and I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my own body. My first reaction was to assume it was a terrible joke, but the look in the waitress's eyes conveyed a seriousness I couldn't dismiss. I looked at my wine glass, which seconds earlier I had been so eager to taste. Now it looked sinister. I managed to keep my expression neutral while my mind raced. Marcus and Allison continued chatting, oblivious to what had just transpired. "Excuse me," I said, hoping my voice sounded natural. "I need to run to the restroom for a second." I stood up on shaky legs, slipping the paper into my pocket. As I walked toward the back, my mind was a whirlwind of questions and fear. In the restroom, I reread the note, hoping the words might magically change. The handwriting was feminine, rushed, but legible.